You're listening to Barbell Logic,
the podcast where we talk about what it means to experience strength
and how you can use simple, hard, and effective strategies in training and nutrition to improve your life.
It starts with meeting you where you are right now and finding lasting solutions.
Welcome to the show.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Barbell Logic podcast. Welcome to Beast Over Burden. I'm your host, Niki Sims. I'm the CXO of Barbell Logic. I am also a strength and nutrition coach. With me is Andrew Jackson. He is our COO.
Howdy do.
Howdy, howdy. He is also a strength and nutrition coach. How's it going, Andrew?
Good.
Good.
I'm excited that we're not doing video recording today because I am desperately in need of a haircut.
What do you call your beard? Frothy.
Frothy.
He's gotten frothy, everybody. Which he's got a giant skull, and it makes your skull look even bigger when you're a little floofed out. But a gorgeous jawline, and when he gets it trimmed up, it's
wow.
I feel bad for you all for not actually being able to see it, but lucky me.
Yikes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
What?
So what are we talking about today?
Well, we're going to talk about one of the tougher things to stomach as we are trying to improve ourselves on our journey through lifting, really professional growth and even personal growth, which is the discomfort that we must endure when we decide that we want to get better.
You're talking about dry scoop and protein powder?
That is uncomfortable. I don't know if I've done a lot of protein powder dry scooping. Definitely a creatine dry scooper.
Well,
that's the way.
I don't think I've ever just raw dogged a dry scoop of protein powder, but I've definitely encountered clumps of powder that have been unmixed or liquefied in the water, and you try to mix it up, but then the clump is so big that it like explodes into your mouth with the powder.
I know. Yep.
Yeah. So what have you experienced in your training that, or in your clients' training, that you find consistently is uncomfortable?
One moment of discomfort that tends to be more than one moment, really. It happens, I think, multiple times on a client journey is they want to be somewhere, but they're not there in that moment. They have visualized, they have decided that there should be this amount of weight on the bar, and something happens where progress or form or recovery means that they can't add 5 pounds or they can't be lifting, a certain amount of insert kilos or pounds or whatever. And they are uncomfortable with where they are because they've decided that they should be somewhere different. And I think that's a really tough moment of like acceptance and deciding or learning that things don't always go exactly to plan. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Do you have a specific example?
Yeah, like I think that happens a lot when people are coming out of like the honeymoon linear progression phase. And it's just always a given that, okay, well, I will go into the gym and I will add 5 pounds. I will go into the gym and I will add 2.5 pounds. And then something happens where we can't do that anymore. Like they're either not able to recover from the work they just have done, or they just haven't gotten stronger at the rate that we thought we were going to get stronger at. And so we have to change the programming. And so they start doing weights that they've done before. And I think that feels uncomfortable because they think they should be going at a faster rate. So they have to accept that the rate is changing. And that's definitely been coming up with some clients where, we thought we would just keep doing this forever and ever. And then it gets a little more complex and they get frustrated. And it's a hard conversation because, and I know you've spoken to this and you say it really eloquently, but at the beginning, it's a really simple gamification of the process of getting stronger where you put 5 pounds on and you decide that you have become stronger when it's a little more complicated than that. And now we kind of have to break that model and say, actually, you are still getting stronger even though you're doing the same weights. And so that's one of the tougher conversations that I've been having with a client is teaching them what it starts to look like as the rate of strength adaptation changes.
That is definitely an uncomfortable truth.
Yeah. Has something like that come up for you in your own progress or with your clients?
Well, when you first mentioned that topic, the thought that came up for me is the James Clear Atomic Habits layers of identity, process, and habits, and that any meaningful change or any meaningful growth is going to require change of one or all of those layers. And usually, if you really drill down into why meaningful growth and change is uncomfortable, it's because at some level, the identity that you hold for yourself, the processes and the habits that you have, no longer align with the person who you want to be. And you can try to change the surface level activities that you're doing or the habits, or try to white knuckle your day-to-day life. But if you don't think about what it is that you fundamentally need to change about yourself and go through the hard work of reorienting your identity, which I think touches a little bit on what you're talking about in the example you gave, you're going to revert back to the mean. You're going to revert back to your identity and your habits.
So I'm thinking like the identity of this person who's, we'll call them the newbie gains phase, like they're a lifter who gets to brag frequently about their PRs. And every time they train, they are rewarded by becoming stronger. And that is associated with what the weight on the bar says. So their identity is someone who's getting stronger every single session and that they PR all the time and they're constantly improving. Does that maybe fit into an identity that becomes questioned?
Right. As well as all the habits that are going along with that. Eventually you, in your case, might bump into a situation where they're not progressing because they're not getting enough calories. And maybe they have a certain identity and habits around nutrition.
Yes.
That have to be reevaluated and to change. Things like it gets as simple as, how many meals a day you eat, how much protein you eat, how many vegetables you eat, what your day-to-day lifestyle and habits are that are going to potentially have to change in order to align with who you are trying to become through results of your training.
I'm so glad you looped that in. That's a huge one that we've spoken about before, is when you learn that the way you were eating is not the way you have to eat to get what you want. That's a big one.
Yeah, and in both directions. For me initially was that I was not eating enough. When I got into strength training for the first year or year plus, I didn't really get any stronger. I just kind of kept coming in. Part of it was that I was not doing a very structured strength training program, but the other part of it is that I was intentionally trying to lose body fat. Was my identity and my goal at the time was kind of more geared towards looking significantly leaner. And in order to change my goals towards more weight on the bar, I had to completely restructure the eating habits that I had day to day to significantly increase the calories. Now, I think I overshot a bit there and eventually got to a point where I had to change in the other direction. And that required a lot of effort to rebuild habits around the kinds of foods that I ate, the amount of beer that I drank, things that had sort of normalized in my day-to-day life around a certain body weight. I then had to reevaluate and build from the ground up a new set of habits that supported the body weight that I was aiming at, which was sort of in the middle, almost exactly in the middle of where I was when I started, where I kind of overshot to and where I am comfortably now.
That's interesting. There is some time where when you make that switch, when you kind of realize, okay, what I'm doing now isn't in fact what I want to be doing. I think people go through certain emotions like embarrassment, fear, sometimes I think I want to say guilt, where they see that the actions aren't aligning, even though like a week ago, their actions might have been aligned with exactly what they wanted. And then a week later, they realize that's not the case anymore. And I think that's actually a really tough emotional moment to break the actions from the new identity that you're seeking, where the actions don't align with that anymore. I think that can be a tough transition.
Yeah, I think that there's two levels to that. One is that it on some level requires that you admit to yourself that the person you are today is not the person you want to be at some point in the future. There's almost a negative connotation with that.
Yeah.
That the person that you are today is inadequate, or at least it's not living up to the standards of the person that you are trying to become.
I totally feel that. Like, that is an emotion that comes up for me where it's as soon as I learned that I can be better, I pretty much instantly feel bad about who I am at the moment. And it definitely takes some energy to give myself some grace in that moment. So yeah, you hit the nail on that one, I think.
The second aspect of that is you're trying to make these uncomfortable changes and are probably going to fail is some significant percentage of the time, which also has negative connotations because progress is not going to be linear with a process that requires you to overhaul your identity processes and habits. So you get this double whammy of feeling inadequate and then failing, which is, it's challenging to set a goal immediately creates those two consequences of inadequacy and failure.
Yeah.
It's built into the process. That is a very uncomfortable truth that by definition, having a goal that you're reaching for that is different than where you are today requires you to accept inadequacy and failure.
And it really like calls on you, and hearing you say it that way was really helpful. Like, it calls on you to say, thank you for me being able to see that difference now, because now I know that I can improve. And if you didn't see that, then you didn't know that you could actually grow. The whole ignorance is bliss thing where you just are happy in your current state of being. And then when you see this revealed and you feel that, you can actually be grateful to know that that plan actually exists. But yeah, it's tough there for a minute.
Yeah, and it requires you to let go of judgment. I was just reading a quote the other day. I'm not going to be able to recall it, but the short version of it is that in order to get out of your own way, one of the most important things you can do is let go of judging, particularly yourself. And it certainly doesn't add a whole lot to your day if you're walking around judging other people either. Leave that to higher powers or others if that's your jam. But judgment is something that is so normalized in our day-to-day lives. We're expected to have judgments about everything. And it rarely adds a whole lot of value to spend a lot of time on it. So even if you take feeling inadequate and failing at their face value, the negative connotation only comes when you bring the judgment in.
When you decide, oh, that's bad, I shouldn't be feeling that way.
Right. There's nothing inherently wrong with being inadequate or failing. I think there's things that you could judge about how you deal with failure or inadequacy, depending on your worldview. Or at least there's things that you're not going to accomplish if you wallow in inadequacy and failure. But those are part of the process of striving for anything or any kind of process improvement, is being able to accept the now, to use your model from a few weeks back, aim at some target that's where you want to be and start chipping away at making those changes. And it's going to be uncomfortable by definition the entire time you're trying to find that edge of comfort and push in the direction that you're trying to go a little bit at a time, knowing that there's going to be pendulum swings back, and then you got to dust yourself off, keep going, and take one minimum effective dose step at a time.
Yeah. It's also kind of neat too, when you decide, who you want to be, and you list what the habits are of that person, you can really start to see how doable it is for you to achieve, especially if you take it one thing at a time. There might be some steps that are, 3, things away, or some habits that are further away than others, but you can really start to envision yourself as this new person, and you create the map of how to get there. And that can feel really good. It can give you some reassurance for when you're in that moment of, instant frustration of not being there already. At least you have something that you can take action on. And this is something that I've always really admired in how you work is you create action for improvement. And by identifying the distance between the two, you can start making steps forward. And that feels good. We all feel good when we do that.
Yeah, I think that's also where a coach becomes so valuable, because you are hiring somebody to outsource a lot of that work. You're hiring somebody who has the ability to see your potential. You tell them who you want to become, what your goals are, what you're trying to accomplish, usually because you're stuck and you haven't been able to figure out how to do it on your own, or you're 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or maybe 1 step forward, 2 steps back, spinning your wheels. And a coach is somebody who can see and has experience going from where that person is to where they want to go, and can help them build that vision, maybe flesh it out more concretely. Like you said, coach them through thinking through what those steps are, and then break it down into incremental, achievable steps.
Like workout by workout, week by week, that bite size, that is so helpful.
Exactly. The client gets to show up, open their app, in our case, here are my instructions. So I don't have to worry about finding that uncomfortable edge. I don't have to worry about managing that vision and thinking through all of the steps. I just need to show up and do the thing today. That is my 1 or 2 actions, which in this case tends to be 1 or 2 lifts, or maybe it's 1 to 3 lifts. A few manageable, concrete things that I can do today in the present moment that I know and trust somebody else is guiding me through to get from where I am to where I want to be.
Yeah, that feels really good. But there's still the time when like you and your client get on the same page and they start taking action and they do it for 2 weeks and they're mad that they're not there yet. That's another uncomfortable moment, perhaps an uncomfortable conversation where you have to remember that it takes time and habits don't come in 2 weeks. They come in, 3 months, 90 days. And you have to be patient and, go into that moment of now where you're like accepting of where you're at right now and trusting that you're, going in the right direction.
Yeah. And that's also uncomfortable. Patience, trusting in a process that takes months and really years for most people to accomplish the goals that they imagine.
Yeah.
Which is also difficult because so much of the market and the industry is geared towards achieving it now or in 6 weeks.
Biohacking.
Booty blasting, biohacking. You can go down all kinds of rabbit holes chasing the perfect solution that are often attractive because they're not as uncomfortable. They're usually, by definition, quick fixes that you can buy and take something off the shelf and that'll solve your problem, or specifically marketed to be as easy as possible.
Right.
So it's a tough sell to say, what you're going to do with us is something that's really hard and it's going to take a long time and you're not going to want to do it many times and it might hurt and you might have some sort of injury setback along the way. And trust us, in the long run, you will be stronger, happier, healthier, and become the person that you want to be along the way. It's a big ask.
Yeah. I'm thinking of a time like when I've decided to intentionally gain some weight. I think this was late last year. Like that's fun to say, and you start thinking of the long-term end goal of, well, I'm going to build some more muscle. But what happens, maybe a month or 2 in is you feel that there is more of you. Like waist gets bigger, clothes fit differently, like
Mirror looks different.
Like outfits that used to feel really great no longer feel great anymore. And that is super uncomfortable. But at the same time, it's good. That is exactly what I asked for, exactly what I wanted. But in that moment, it is really tough to not feel the end goal yet. You just feel the discomfort, except that is the exact right kind of discomfort that is meant to be experienced at that moment.
How do you differentiate between the discomfort that's moving you forward and discomfort that is not good. And I think this gets really at one of the areas of coaching where the client becomes really vulnerable because now they're working with somebody who's nudging them to override the intuition sometimes, or that feeling of discomfort that you're talking about. How do you differentiate between good and bad? How did you know to keep going in that case?
Because there was detail to what it would mean to gain weight. I mean, even just saying it out loud, you gain weight. When you gain weight, there is more of you. And so you have to know that that's what that means. And that's right for what the plan was. And there's also some structure and some kind of guidelines to how the weight is to be gained in terms of adding a bit of calories, not adding 1,000 calories per day, but adding 200 or 300 calories per day. So there are still some guidelines and some structure to move in that direction, which means that I can still say I am following the plan. But if it was an unstructured weight gain and I just ate more sometimes, didn't eat enough other times, got my calories from, maybe poor quality nutrition choices versus high quality nutrition choices, didn't track my protein, then it would be tough to know if I was actually going in the right direction. There would be discomfort and uncertainty. But when there's discomfort and certainty, then it's reassuring.
Sounds to me like you trust your coach.
Yes, that's a huge part of it. Yeah. Yeah.
She demonstrated that she's got a plan and that she's able to guide you through the details of the process. And you obviously have a lot of experience with the mechanics of it as well.
Yeah.
And she and you delivered on the results.
Yeah.
Back to my ability, integrity, and benevolence. She cares a lot about you and your training, and you guys got the results. You stuck to the plan, and your coach stuck to the direction, and the results happened as it predicted. And so the discomfort was limited around ultimately that change in identity and feeling in that moment, but it aligned with where you wanted to go.
Right. Yeah.
You weren't uncomfortable because you were being asked to do something that didn't fit the plan or the model or do
was
something.
Like a whim of an ask, sometimes
Right.
There's just a knee-jerk reaction to seeing yourself in a picture at a terrible angle. And you're like, I got to change everything. That's not who I thought I was, which I think still it's important to consider what you're seeing or feeling when you see something like that. But it wasn't a whim of an intention.
Yeah, I think you've put that really well. The reason I ask is I've had experiences with coaches who walk this very fine line of asking you to do something that is borderline nudging you to be uncomfortable and sometimes does not seem to be in the best interest of a lifter. I'll show you, just as a random example, I had a coach who didn't do it to me, but he was directing a client to rapidly warm up to a PR weight, make these huge, 100-kilo jumps up to a PR weight.
Wow.
And on one hand, you could argue, and he had done things similar to this that sort of stretched your perception of what you thought was possible. And it worked. But there was something about that example, and the client was expressing just didn't seem right. And the coach just kind of kept pushing him. You can do this. You can do this. There's something that crossed over that line into this doesn't feel right anymore. And I think it was exactly that, what you described. It felt like it was coming at a whim. And the coach, there was a loss of perceived benevolence or care in that case.
Interesting.
I don't know. It might be on a bit of a tangent here, but I do think there's a line to walk there. There's a big responsibility as a coach that you need to hold that willingness of your client to be vulnerable with you, to trust in you that you're going to give them direction that at times feels uncomfortable, and they're going to go do it. And that's a huge responsibility that I feel as a coach, and I think is critical.
For real. Yeah. It's really on the coach to remember what's important to the client all the time. All the time. Because when the client is feeling vulnerable, they might want to pull back. Or even when you as the coach are, doubting your decisions, you always have to go back to what's important to the client because that's who this is for. That's who it's for the entire time. And if you forget that that's the North Star, you start making the client feel uncomfortable. And you as the coach will start making decisions that, don't have high integrity.
Right.
I'm curious to hear, give me examples, real life examples of in the moment, this is uncomfortable, that you as a coach have felt or as a client, but examples of with as much detail of this is so uncomfortable. Am I doing the right thing? I want to hear some from you.
The most visceral for me was recovering from the back injury that I think I'm finally on the other side of now.
Yeah.
I had a really hard time trusting in the process of doing certain exercises when it was painful at times. Counterintuitively, I also had trouble letting go of my identity as a 500 plus pound deadlifter for reps and needing to let go and warm up as if I were less than a 400 pound deadlifter for reps. And so there was kind of an interesting push-pull there where there were some exercises that I didn't want to do that I needed to do. And there were some weights that I wanted to do that I shouldn't be doing. And so I was feeling discomfort in conflicting directions, actually. And that, I think, stalled my progress a lot because I wasn't bought into the process. And also during that period of time, I had a lot of external variables personally, but then I was also changing coaches a couple of different times. So some of that was just bogging the process down. But I would say that's the most concrete lifting example. There are infinite personal and professional examples that come to mind. I think lifting and training is becoming less of a good example for me anymore because that's so embedded in my identity that I'm going to lift no matter what.
Right.
I don't have any resistance to that idea. Even when I feel terrible, I'm going to go lift.
Well, you've gotten, 20 years of reps practicing that at this point.
So there's little subsets of the lifting and training process that I might have slight discomfort, but it's much more now on personal professional development where I will have major roadblocks that are preventing me from doing something that I need to do in order to accomplish the end goal that I'm aiming for. And the pattern that I have of my day-to-day life, whatever it's like, the most concrete example there is I've, over the course of my life, have a tendency to react to my emotions as if the emotions are my reality, as if
the source of truth.
The source of truth for me, and I identify almost with my emotions. What's challenging about that is that's been a huge motivator for my entire life, competitively, professionally, personally. I've been driven by reacting to those emotions and accomplished a lot. And yet that's not really serving me very well anymore. It's having a detrimental effect across for all of those different spectrums, including my training.
Yeah.
And so I'm having to interrupt this pattern that has served me for 40 years plus, 45 years, and retrain myself to instead interrupt or stop acting immediately, step back and be intentional about what it is I want to do. That's probably the most relevant source of discomfort for me right now. It does impact training though, because it was part of the reason why I was pushing myself to keep lifting or deadlifting heavy weight. And then I would re-injure my back or just undo a lot of the progress. I kept resetting. And I had to step back and be like, okay, well, this isn't working for me anymore.
Yeah.
So what do I need to change about the way that I'm approaching this? to be able to move forward.
You had spoken about, it's a book that you're reading about, one of the rules of power is breaking rules. And for me, when I was chewing on that more, it made me realize you have to break your own rules sometimes.
That's right.
And that sounds like what you were doing as well. This was a rule that I was living by, and now I need to break it. And that's what will move you forward, which I think is really cool.
Yeah. And what's difficult about it many times is that you might not be aware. Awareness is always the first step. You don't even know that you're operating on that. It wasn't like I was walking around most of my life saying one of my personal rule sets is whatever emotion I'm feeling in the moment, I'm just going to react to.
Right.
It took me 45 years to even notice, like, wow, that's something I'm doing on a regular basis. And sometimes it's fun because then if I'm in a good mood, that's great.
Yeah. Fun takes over.
Exactly. So yeah, awareness, which is again, going back to the value of a coach, is that a good coach, I think, through a lot of questioning, can help you become aware of it, what it is exactly that you're doing first. And then you start being able to identify where you are now. And that's step one. Like, I don't think you can do very well at moving forward or moving in a direction if you don't have a good understanding of where you are now. The first step in lean process improvement, as a concrete example, is to map the current state. Once you map the current state, now you can start identifying the gaps to what your future state is. So you map your current state, you design your future state, identify the gaps, and then build an action plan and start moving down that path.
Yeah, that feels good. But it's going to feel uncomfortable. And that's also good. Anything you want to add before we wrap this up?
It's a good therapy session. Good therapy session.
Yeah, you're welcome, everybody. It really is just so applicable to so many things. It's amazing. It just keeps reinforcing how lifting, you need to have a growth mindset. And I think that's why it appeals to people who are professionals and who are just so eager to get better and better, is because there are just so many parallels in life. It's really fun.
I agree. Where can people learn more, Niki?
They can learn more on our many, many pieces of content on Barbell Logic. We have an amazing YouTube channel. You can visit our website, barbelllogic.com, and check out our free content. We have an amazing newsletter. You can even schedule a call with one of us if you go to barbelllogic.com/experience. We would love to chat with you. We'd love to hear from you, and feel free to leave us a review and give this a share.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you here next week on Barbell Logic, Beast Over Burden. Thanks, Andrew.
Bye-bye.